A silver luxury car rolled down the quiet evening street, its headlights cutting through the dim glow of the setting sun. Inside sat Daniel Hart, a billionaire whose name filled business magazines but whose heart had grown distant from anything outside his empire. He was lost in thoughts about a major deal when something unexpected happened. A small figure ran into the road, forcing him to slam the brakes so hard the tires screeched. Daniel's pulse jumped. He stepped out, expecting trouble, but instead he found a young black boy trembling, tears streaking his dusty cheeks. The boy looked no older than 10, his clothes worn, his shoes nearly falling apart. Yet the desperation in his eyes was stronger than anything Daniel had seen in boardrooms or negotiations. Before Daniel could speak, the boy dropped to his knees on the asphalt, hands clasped, his voice cracking with fear and hope. "Please, sir, please save my sister." His words hit Daniel harder than the sudden stop. The billionaire blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. The boy repeated himself, this time louder, his voice trembling, "Please, she's dying. No one will help us." For a moment, the world around Daniel felt disturbingly silent. The boy was shaking, as if holding himself together by sheer will. Daniel had spent years keeping his emotions locked away, but something about the boy's plea cracked the walls he had carefully built. He crouched down and gently lifted the boy's chin. "What's your name?" he asked. The boy sniffed and whispered, "Caleb." Daniel softened his voice. "Tell me what happened, Caleb." Caleb stood slowly, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. "My sister, Amira, she's 14. She got really sick 2 days ago. I tried to take her to the clinic, but they wouldn't see her because we don't have enough money." His voice broke. "I begged them, sir. I begged them, but they pushed us out." Daniel felt his chest tighten. The boy continued, his words spilling out like a dam had burst. "I've been asking people all day. No one listens. They look at me, and they walk away." He paused, voice trembling. "You were my last hope." Daniel felt something unfamiliar, a sting of guilt, or maybe awakening empathy he had ignored for too long. He looked at his car, his tailored suit, his expensive watch, all symbols of a world Caleb didn't belong to. Yet here they were, standing at the intersection of two completely different lives. "Where is she now?" Daniel asked. Caleb pointed toward a narrow alley between faded brick buildings. "In there. I didn't want to leave her, but I had to find help." The boy's voice was full of fear that he had already waited too long. Without hesitation, Daniel put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Take me to her." Caleb's eyes widened with disbelief, as if no one had ever said those words to him before. He nodded quickly and started running, and Daniel followed, his polished shoes splashing in puddles and dust that he normally avoided. They slipped through the alley, where the smell of damp concrete and hopelessness lingered. Far at the end, next to an old mattress, lay a girl with braided hair and sunken eyes. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale. She looked up weakly as Caleb ran to her side. "Amira," he whispered, touching her forehead gently. She forced a tiny smile for him, then looked at Daniel with confusion. Daniel knelt beside her. Even without medical training, he could see she was dangerously ill. "How long has she been like this?" he asked. Caleb hugged his sister as though protecting her from the world. 2 days. She fainted yesterday. I tried giving her water, but she keeps getting weaker." Daniel felt a surge of urgency. He pulled out his phone and dialed his private medical contact. "I need an emergency team. At my location immediately," he ordered. His tone was sharp, commanding, the same tone he used to close billion-dollar deals, except this time, it wasn't money he was saving, but a life. Caleb looked up at him, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Is she going to be okay?" Daniel hesitated for a second, then spoke with certainty. "I won't let anything happen to her." The boy broke into tears, leaning over his sister as if those words gave him newfound strength. Within minutes, the quiet alley filled with the sound of sirens, not police sirens, but the private medical team Daniel personally funded for emergencies. They rushed in with equipment, assessing Amira's condition and preparing to move her. Caleb held her hand until they gently encouraged him to step aside so they could work. He looked at Daniel for guidance, unsure and terrified. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on the boy's back. "You're coming with us. You're not leaving your sister again." The boy nodded quickly, clinging to Daniel's sleeve as if he feared this miracle might disappear. As the medics lifted Amira onto a stretcher, Daniel glanced around the alley. The poverty, the silence, the forgotten corner of the city, it all struck him deeply. He wondered how many more Calebs were out there, pleading for help no one heard. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of purpose that went beyond wealth or success. As they all climbed into the ambulance, Caleb sat beside his sister, holding her hand tightly. Daniel watched them, feeling the weight of a decision forming in his mind. This wasn't just about rescuing a girl. This was the beginning of something much bigger, something he hadn't yet understood, but knew he couldn't walk away from. And as the ambulance doors closed, Caleb looked up at Daniel with teary eyes and whispered, "Thank you for stopping your car." Daniel swallowed hard and nodded, realizing he hadn't just stopped his car, he had stopped his life long enough to finally see someone else's pain. The ambulance sped through the city streets, its lights reflecting off glass buildings and worn-down neighborhoods alike. Inside, Caleb held his sister's hand, his small fingers wrapped tightly around hers as if he feared she might slip away if he let go. Amira's eyelids fluttered weakly, but she seemed more responsive now that the medical team had begun stabilizing her. Daniel sat across from them, watching every movement with a growing heaviness in his heart. He had spent years surrounded by wealth and protection, but this moment, seeing two children fight for survival, felt more real than anything he had lived through lately. As soon as they reached Hart Memorial Hospital, a facility Daniel privately owned but rarely visited, the staff rushed Amira into an emergency room. Caleb tried to follow, but a nurse gently stopped him. His panicked eyes darted around until Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "They're going to help her," he said softly. "She's safe now." Caleb nodded, but his trembling didn't stop. Daniel guided him to a waiting area filled with soft chairs and warm lighting, a stark contrast to the cold alley they had come from. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Caleb sat curled up in a chair, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the floor. Daniel sat beside him, unsure how to bridge the gap between their two worlds. Finally, Caleb whispered, "Do you think she'll live?" His voice was so small it almost disappeared into the air. Daniel took a slow breath. "The doctors here are the best. They will do everything they can." It wasn't just reassurance, it was a promise he would enforce personally. Caleb hesitated before asking, "Why did you help us?" Everyone else walked away. Daniel didn't have an answer ready. He stared at the glossy tiles beneath his feet, remembering the countless times he hurried past people on the street without a second glance. "I don't know," he admitted truthfully. "But when you asked, I couldn't walk away." Caleb studied him with eyes wiser than his age. "I'm glad you didn't." Minutes stretched into an hour. Doctors came and went, their calm expressions offering some comfort. At last, a senior physician named Drive Morgan approached them. She removed her mask and exhaled softly. "She's stable for now," she said. Caleb jumped to his feet, relief flooding his face. "Can I see her, doctor?" Morgan nodded, but then she looked at Daniel with a deeper seriousness. "I need to speak with you privately," she said. Caleb clung to Daniel's sleeve again, unwilling to be left alone. Daniel knelt in front of him. "You can go sit by your sister's bed," he said gently. "I'll be right behind you." The boy hesitated, then slowly nodded and followed a nurse to the room. Once he disappeared down the hallway, Daniel turned to Dr. Morgan, bracing himself. Inside her office, the doctor closed the door and folded her arms. "She's suffering from a severe untreated infection," she began. "It's been building for days. If you hadn't brought her in tonight," she paused, letting the unsaid truth sink in. Daniel swallowed hard. "What does she need?" She handed him a clipboard with test results. Strong antibiotics, a few days of monitoring, and a clean environment. "She's malnourished as well. She needs consistent meals and rest." Daniel felt something twist inside him, anger, guilt, frustration. All of this because a clinic refused to treat her. Dr. Morgan nodded grimly. "Unfortunately, yes. It happens far more often than people realize." He sank into a chair, thinking about how many luxuries he had taken for granted. Caleb and Amira had been fighting for something as basic as survival. When Daniel returned to the room, he found Caleb sitting on a stool beside Amira's bed, softly brushing her hair back from her forehead. She was connected to machines, but her breathing was steadier. Her eyes opened when she sensed someone enter. "You came back," she whispered to her brother. Caleb nodded furiously. "I told you I'd find help." Amira's gaze shifted to Daniel. She studied him, her expression full of confusion and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was weak, but the sincerity was overwhelming. Daniel walked closer, unsure how to respond. "You're going to be okay," he said. "The doctors are taking good care of you." She tried to smile, but tears filled her eyes. "We didn't think anyone would help us." Caleb nodded fiercely. "People just walked past us. Some got angry." His voice trembled with the memory. Amira squeezed his hand weakly. "You did your best." Daniel watched the two siblings, a tightness growing in his chest. Everything about them, their bond, their resilience, their quiet suffering, shook him. He wondered how many times he had driven past people like them without seeing their pain. He wondered how many chances he had missed to change a life. As the two children rested, Daniel stepped outside the room and looked through the small window in the door. He saw Caleb holding Amira's hand as if it were the only thing anchoring him to hope. For a moment, Daniel imagined himself as a child. He remembered the emptiness he carried after losing his parents, the loneliness even wealth couldn't erase. He had built walls to protect himself from the world, but tonight, two children had walked straight through them. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "I need background checks on their living situation. I want to know everything, where they live, who takes care of them, what resources they have." His voice was firm but filled with a new kind of determination. Whatever he found, he knew he could no longer turn away. When he hung up, he returned to the hospital room and found that both siblings had finally fallen asleep. Caleb was slumped halfway over the bed, still clutching Amira's fingers. Daniel approached quietly and gently adjusted a blanket over them both. He stood there for a long moment, watching the rise and fall of Amira's breathing. Something inside him shifted, deep and undeniable. He didn't just want to help them tonight. He wanted to help them tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until they had a real chance at life. And in that quiet hospital room, Daniel realized the truth: this was no longer an act of charity. This was the beginning of responsibility, one he intended to honor, no matter what came next. Caleb woke before the sun, his body sore from sleeping half on a stool and half on the edge of his sister's bed. For a moment he panicked, forgetting where he was. Then he saw the clean white walls, the soft beeping machines, and Amira resting peacefully beside him. Relief washed over him like warm water. She was still breathing. She was safe. Daniel had kept his promise. Amira opened her eyes slowly, her gaze clearer than the night before. "Caleb," she whispered. He leaned forward quickly. "I'm here. I didn't leave." She tried to smile but her voice was fragile. "Did you sleep?" Caleb shook his head. "I didn't want you to wake up alone." She squeezed his hand, too weak to say more, but the message was clear: his presence was everything to her. When Daniel entered the room a minute later, holding two warm breakfast trays, both children looked up. There was something different in Daniel's expression this morning. It wasn't pity or obligation, it was something deeper, with concern and purpose intertwined. "Good morning," he said softly. He placed the trays down, one with soft foods for Amira and a fuller meal for Caleb. The boy stared at it like he hadn't seen food in days, which wasn't far from the truth. Caleb hesitated before eating, as if waiting for permission. Daniel nodded. "Go ahead. You need your strength." Caleb took a careful bite, then another, then began eating quickly, unable to help himself. Daniel's chest tightened. No child should ever be this hungry. As they ate, Morgan entered with a chart in her hands. "Good news," she said. "Amira is responding to the antibiotics. Her fever is dropping, and her energy should return gradually." Caleb exhaled a relieved breath. "So she'll be okay." The doctor smiled warmly. "Yes. She'll need a few more days here, but she's out of danger." Caleb bowed his head, whispering something to himself, a prayer or a thank you, Daniel wasn't sure. But the emotion in the room was strong enough to make even him swallow hard. Once the doctor left, Daniel sat beside them. I need to ask you something important, he said. Caleb looked up cautiously, the old fear returning to his eyes. Are we in trouble? He asked, voice shaking just a little. Daniel shook his head quickly. No, you're not in trouble. I just want to understand your situation. Where are your parents? He didn't expect the reaction he got. Caleb's face fell, and Amira turned her head away. A heavy silence grew between them. After a long pause, Amira spoke first. Our mom died last year. Her voice cracked with pain she had carried too long. She got sick, and we tried to get help, but she stopped, unable to continue. Caleb finished for her, tears forming again. She didn't make it. After that, it was just us. Our landlord took the apartment back when we couldn't pay. We've been moving from place to place. He swallowed hard. We didn't tell anyone because we were scared they'd separate us. Daniel felt something inside him break. 2. Children fighting alone in a world that didn't care. No safety, no stability, no one to rely on but each other. Caleb whispered, please don't let them take us away from each other. We only have each other now. The words were so raw and desperate that Daniel felt the weight of them settle heavily in his heart. He knelt in front of Caleb and looked him directly in the eyes. No one is taking you away from your sister, he said firmly. But you can't keep living like this. You need a home. You need support. And I want to help you, both of you. Amira blinked in surprise. Help us, how? Daniel paused, choosing his words carefully. I want to make sure you never have to beg for help again. I want to help you get housing, education, food, medical care, everything you deserve. Caleb stared at him, tears welling up. But why? We're strangers. Daniel shook his head. Not anymore. The room grew quiet. Caleb wiped his eyes aggressively, as if trying to hide his tears. No one ever wanted us before, he whispered. People looked at us like we were trouble. Daniel felt anger rise, not at the children, but at a society that had failed them so completely. I don't see trouble, he said softly. I see 2 brave kids who survived more than most adults ever will. For the first time, a small but genuine smile touched Amira's lips. Later that afternoon, after Amira fell asleep again, Daniel took Caleb for a short walk around the hospital garden. The boy stayed close to him, glancing up nervously every few seconds. Are you gonna leave after she gets better? Caleb asked finally. The fear in his voice was unmistakable. Daniel slowed his steps and crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. No, he said gently. I'm not leaving. I promised to help, and I meant every word. Caleb's lip trembled. But people always leave once things get hard. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. Then I'll be the first person in your life who doesn't. The boy couldn't hold back anymore. He threw his arms around Daniel in a tight, desperate hug. Daniel froze for a moment, surprised, then slowly wrapped his arms around Caleb, a protective instinct rising in him he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. As he held the trembling child, Daniel understood something undeniable. This wasn't just charity or kindness. This was a beginning, of responsibility, of connection, of a bond he couldn't walk away from. He would make sure these children were never alone again. And as the boy clung to him, Daniel silently vowed that saving Amira was only the start. Their lives were about to change, not for a moment, but forever.